Today on CityCast Philly, have you ever gone down a Philly sidewalk and suddenly there was a giant construction barrier and you had to move into the street just to get around it? Well, I chatted with Inga Saffron, Pulitzer Prize winning architecture critic at the Philadelphia Inquirer back in March, about why she says our sidewalks are such a mess. It's Wednesday, June 21st. I'm Trinina Ree, and here's what Philly's talking about. Inga, Philly likes to brag that it's one of the most walkable cities in the country, but it sounds like you actually have a problem with that, right?
Yes, today I do. I do have a problem with that claim.
Why do you say that?
Well, of course, Philadelphia has great streets. The city goes back to colonial times, well before the automobile. And so our streets are sized for people, to walk, because that's how people got around in those days. And our streets are so intimate and accessible and, cozy. And it should be a great walkable city. But right now we're undergoing this crazy building boom all over the city in so many neighborhoods in Center City and, many, many neighborhoods out to West Philly, North Philly, South Philly. And too often when developers fence off a site for construction, they make no provision for people to walk past that site. They don't create a walkway. Their fences encroach on the sidewalk. And so it's like running a gauntlet right now. There are streets like 12th Street, for example, in Center City near Jefferson Hospital, where there are three high-rise buildings on 3 blocks. And one's on the east side, one's on the west side, one's on the east side. So it's impossible to walk those 3 blocks, which might be one of the most heavily pedestrian traveled stretches in the city because it's near Jefferson Hospital. All these people are going to their doctors, and a lot of them are older, and a lot of them have various physical movement, mobility impairments, and they have to go through that gauntlet. That is not walkable.
Inga, you met with a woman who had a really hard time navigating the sidewalks. Can you tell us about her experience?
Yeah, her name is Amanda Perezzo, and she is a trained occupational therapist. She teaches occupational therapy at Jefferson Hospital, ironically. And she's 37 years old, and she very tragically was hit by a stray bullet in her spine. And that was about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and paralyzed. Her legs were paralyzed. And so she's adjusted to life in a wheelchair. She's been very heroic. I mean, really incredible. And she was, determined to go back to work. In 5 months, she was teaching again at Jefferson. She found an apartment in a building with an elevator. She adjusted everything about her life so she could live as normally as possible. And the one thing she couldn't adjust to, or that she's having trouble adjusting to, is traveling the streets because, she's in her wheelchair. She's commuting by wheelchair to Jefferson, and her way is constantly blocked. And the Inquirer did an amazing video of just, her morning of going to work. And you held your breath watching her maneuver into the street with this traffic rushing by because the sidewalks were blocked. And she does that every single day. And she never knows when they're going to pop up, these blockages. So, and that's just one person. I mean, there's so many people, if they're not in wheelchairs, they might use a cane, they might be blind. You have people with strollers. It's bad for everybody.
And you say, developers are like hogging the sidewalks here.
Absolutely, yeah. And the thing is, we have rules. Mayor Kenny, as a council person, introduced a lot of really good rules that were meant to regulate those things. And of course, there's the 25-year-old Americans with Disabilities Act, which is
Mm-hmm.
a federal law that mandates
88, yeah.
that you
Mm-hmm.
have to ADA, you have to provide, safe walkways for people, that for everybody. So we have all these laws, but they're not being enforced.
Right. And you just mentioned that Jim Kenney tried to regulate sidewalk closures when he was a council member. So, what steps did he take to make that happen?
At that point, I don't think the city was even charging developers who occupied the sidewalks. And there were no rules on where you had to place signage, warning people there was going to be a blockage. And so he introduced these measures in city council, which passed, setting fees, requiring signage, because if you're going to close a sidewalk, you should tell people at the corner so they can cross safely.
Right. Or prepare not to go down that street.
Yes, exactly. So he did all that, which was great. He finally brought some order to this. And he made it his signature issue. And his Facebook page was full of complaints about, this is before he was mayor, how poorly the city was enforcing these things. So when he became mayor, the expectation was that he would really focus on this issue. But instead, those fees have been a windfall for the city. The city has collected $21 million in fees since 2017. But instead of giving that money to the streets department or to the Department of Licenses and Inspections, it's gone into what they call the general fund, which is the big pot of money, the tax money the city gets. And streets department hasn't been able to hire enough inspectors. I think that's one problem. So the developers, they have to file to close the sidewalks. They have to pay the fees. They're doing that. But there's no one inspecting them to make sure they're really living up to their promises. And the second problem, which is just as bad, is I do think in the streets department, there is a tendency to privilege the automobile. They want to make sure that cars flow. And so, if a developer says, oh, it would be hard to set up a walkway, or if the inspector thinks the walkway would slow down traffic, they don't even require it. And there's all kinds of inconsistencies. On the same street, you'll see one project with a walkway, and then a block away, a project without a walkway. So
Mm-hmm.
if your argument is, we need to keep the street open so the traffic can flow, that doesn't make any sense.
Blazing deals, boundless options. It's Hot Grill Summer at Whole Foods Market from June 14th through July 4th. Fire up the grill with quality cuts at the best prices. We're talking animal welfare certified meat. Check out the sales on bone-in ribeye, beef kebabs, and New York strip steak. Round out your barbecue with plant-based proteins, sliced cheese, soft buns, and all the condiments. Plus, sales on fresh strawberries, peaches, and more. Don't forget the pie either. Get grilling at Whole Foods Market. Terms apply.
What would make sidewalks safer for pedestrians?
Well, in terms of this problem of all these construction sites, I believe in almost every case, maybe not 100% case, in the majority of cases, let's say, you could either not permit the developer to occupy the sidewalk, or if they need to occupy the sidewalk, and there are legitimate needs, because it's a city and these building sites are very tight, so they might really need that extra space. And if they do, fine, they can build a protected walkway in the street. And let's say it's one of those really narrow Philadelphia streets, and it's only one lane, and you really don't want to block cars. In New York City, one of the things they've done is they erect these sheds, these sidewalk sheds, where they're strong enough where you could put a lot of the equipment and material on the roof. So it keeps the sidewalk open and it provides extra storage space for the contractor. And that's an alternative. I guess another alternative would be to actually close the street. And there is one case where the city has done that. There's a tall apartment building going up on the 1600 block of Sansom. between 16th and 17th. And Sansom's a pretty narrow street, and the city closed off the whole block. They just, I guess they concluded there are other ways to get around. The developer really, really needed the space, and nothing could be done. So they closed it to cars, but they kept the sidewalk across from the construction open because there are stores on that street. That's an option. It's a grid city. If you can't go down one street, you go down another street, right? If you're driving.
Right, to make that turn, because it's a lot of one ways too.
Yeah, it's a whole city of one-way streets, right?
Right.
But the thing about a grid, and this is what's so great about Philadelphia, both for pedestrians and drivers, is if a street has to be closed, there's always another way around. And of course, it's a lot easier if you're in a car to take that detour than if you're a pedestrian. But we tend to want the traffic to flow easily. And, as a city, we don't think twice about inconveniencing pedestrians.
We've been talking about sidewalk safety, but where can construction companies put their equipment that's needed for these types of projects if it's not safe for them to spill over onto the sidewalks and into the streets?
Well, this is definitely a problem because this is an old city, and originally all the buildings were low and small, and now we're building much bigger buildings. It's not like the suburbs where, things are being built in big fields and there's plenty of room to deliver materials to the site and store their equipment. Everything is like you need military level logistics to build a building in Philadelphia. So you have to plan all that, where you're going to stack the drywall, where you're going to put the crane or the lift or whatever. So I don't begrudge these contractors or developers from trying to get as much space as they can. And I would say there's also a safety issue. You want to keep people a little bit distant from where these lifts are raising up steel beams or whatever. So, I'm not against closing the sidewalks. I think if that increases safety for construction, that's a good thing. I'm just saying that the default is too often to close the sidewalk and not provide any alternative. And as a city, I think we need to think harder about how can we provide a safe alternative for pedestrians. And we're clearly not doing that in enough cases.
Inga Saffron, award-winning architecture critic at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thanks so much for joining me on CityCast Philly.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you, Trinae.
We'll have a link to Inga's full story in our show notes. And here's what else Philly's talking about. Here's an update on the I-95 rebuild. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro announced this week that temporary lanes being built for the damaged section of I-95 will open this weekend. The Philadelphia Inquirer reports in a press conference, Shapiro praised the teams that have been working around the clock. And Pennsylvania's Transportation Secretary Mike Carroll also added that the material used for the repairs is safe and able to withstand traffic and the weight of heavy trucks. Also, Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner released a new report that found that from 2015 to 2022, Black defendants were charged at disproportionately higher rates than other racial groups. Krasner says this Racial Injustice Report 2023 is meant to outline the impact systemic racism and economic inequality has had within Philly's criminal justice system. And the Flyers unveiled a redesign of the team's uniforms. Philly Voice reports the team jersey will use their iconic burnt orange, which was the team's primary color in the 1980s Flyers logo. And the uniform sleeves are going to be made wider to fit players' numbers. You can check out these jerseys on the Flyers Twitter page at NHL Flyers. Now, y'all know I love the color orange. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode, tell your neighbor, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter too. It's called Hey Philly. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.